back to another installment of On the Fly. This is a podcast for coaches who like conversations about coaching youth lacrosse. That surely includes me. I'm Joey Picard, and I'm joined as always by another conversationalist, the brilliant Martin Bowes, former MLL player, current director of coach and player education for Massachusetts Youth Lacrosse. And today we are joined by my friend and my colleague, John Iodice, president of Duxbury Youth Lacrosse and my co-coach for the current fifth graders in our town. The three of us are talking about adjustments, which is a really important part of coaching. We talk almost ad nauseum about having a plan, preparing, being thoughtful about the curriculum and the progress that we expect to make, and building both individual and team skills by curating these practices and skill sessions. We hope it all goes according to plan, but this is life, which is messy. And especially true of youth sports when you're not dealing with professional athletes, but children full of insane energy and wandering focus. So we can bet the mortgage that we're going to have a few practices for which the wheels fall off the wagon. So what's plan B? Who makes it? When? What does it entail? And how about those adjustments we have to make on game day, on the spot, when things are looking hairy and the clock's ticking against us? It's a huge part of sports. It's a huge part of coaching. And I am personally very excited to talk with two phenomenal coaches, phenomenal lacrosse minds, and phenomenal people to think about the analysis part of our role and having to think on our feet to keep the team on track. So John, welcome to the podcast.
Yeah, thanks for having me. I'm excited.
And I'd like for us to get your little 30-second bio. Tell us a little bit about you growing up, your introduction to the sport, you playing it, you coaching it, anything you'd like us to know.
Yeah, you bet. So I grew up in Milton, Massachusetts, where we did not have youth lacrosse. I played hockey. We skied a lot. Played, soccer, baseball like everybody else. But I had a cousin that was 4 years older than me that grew up in Newton, where it's a big sport in Newton, at least in that time, right? In the early mid 90s, where it wasn't prevalent like it is now. It hadn't grown like that. So got an early exposure, meaning in elementary school to it, and anything my older cousin did, I wanted to do. So just fell in love with the game. And the name, a lot of you probably know, Bussy Adams is a family friend and helped us get lacrosse into Milton. So when I was a freshman, we had a JV team. I played for Norwell for a couple of years on the youth side, just to get some touches. And again, I fell in love with the game. I have 4 kids. I talk to my son all the time just about how my parents at 10 o'clock at night after the gym and practice or a game just tell me to come inside. So I just have a serious love for the game. My college career that's one of the reasons I'm so passionate about coaching. I also coach at Massachusetts, and I think the game has changed, right? Just club sports and the way that kids are recruited. And so I think, my family was very supportive for me, but, somewhat certain limitations. So I just feel like pouring my heart into it because lacrosse taught me a lot of different things in life. And I think it can be any sport. For me, it was lacrosse, and changed who I am as a human being, built confidence, taught me how to identify goals, build a plan, execute on the plan, and the magic always happens. And so, you mentioned that's why I involved on the board, right? And all the coaching that I do it for the love of the game and, what it's given back to me. So that certainly wasn't 30 seconds, but anybody that knows me probably is not surprised because I'm long-winded. So apologize, we went a little over on that.
Well, Marty and I always like to have a 20-minute podcast, and I don't think we've published one that has been under an hour yet. So I think you're in good company, John. Marty, one of the things that I love about coaching with John, because I do, and I have for the last several years now, our kids are the same age, is his energy and his passion is contagious. And on days where I'm kind of coming in and I'm a little light, I just look at John and he's just this huge smile. Are we ready to go? And I just always meet him there, which is great. We work well together. But what I love most about John is I'll get a phone call or a text, and this will not be for a team he has anything to do with. And he's already coached club, and he's already coached both of his sons that day or that week. And he'll say, I kind of want to get out of the house. Do you need me? Do you need me for the 7th graders too? And I'm like, yeah, come on, let's go. So John, in that vein, what makes you tick? Like, what drives you to coach specifically youth? You've already started to answer it, but I want you to elaborate a little bit more as to what is it about the kids that you just really, that drives you?
Such a good question. I mean, I think that it's helping these kids understand bigger picture what this is all about, right? I think especially now with just social media the way it is, everybody's focused like win, win, win. But we've got to do it the right way, right? And you've got to put in the work. And to me, I alluded to it, mentioned it briefly kind of in that intro, is that it taught me. So to take it back, my older cousin played for Newton North, and so seeing these stars, right, that were just unbelievable. And he would talk to me about the work that they would put in. And so what it did is it helped me identify if I want to be one of the best lacrosse players in the state. I'm not a man of stature, right? I'm only 5'7". I was 120 pounds. I needed to put on weight. So getting in the gym and just working my rear end off, but I loved it, which is why I think it's so important for us at a young age to talk to these kids about play every sport, because it's like what you hear in your career, which is find what you love to do and you'll never work a day in your life. And that's how I feel. Again, for me, it was lacrosse. But what I learned when I put in 7 days a week of exercising and doing things off the field when nobody was watching, and then the joy in that level of pride that you have when you see that magic come together, it just gives you that sense of pride. And it's carried through my entire life, my career, and everything I do starts with identify that goal, right? What is that goal? What's the action plan? What do I need to do to get to that goal? And then execution, because it's really, you've seen, you know, a million times over that you're against yourself, right? So how do you train yourself and stick to committing to yourself? Because you can be your own worst enemy, right? But it's kind of like I would come back to my kids a lot and other players that I've coached, which is, hey, I don't want to sit here and tell you what I think you should do if like you're not in love with it, right? And it's hard for a youth player to know that yet, but it's such a big lesson, in my opinion, to like identify what you're going to do and then hold yourself accountable and deliver. And I promise you, it will never fail you. I mean, it doesn't mean that you're always going to get the win, but as long as you identify a reasonable goal, you stick to plan, the magic happens. And that to me is, I love when I see kids maybe, that maybe a little timid, maybe not have a lot of confidence, and then you foster that in with them, and then all of a sudden you see them develop, but they see it in themselves. It changes it gives them that extra little pep in their step that they needed, and kind of it just teaches those lessons. So again, long-winded, but that's what makes me tick, is to help these kids get out of it what I was fortunate enough to get out of it, and be a resource for them.
Because it's addictive. You see it in one kid and you want to see it in as many.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I also want to emphasize one thing you just said, John, which is that not only do you enjoy seeing them get it, but when they realize in themselves, it's like it's kind of another layer to it, right? It's more about them, and it's really like clicking for them because they're recognizing it. And that's a beautiful thing.
It is, and it's a good, like, folks, because I mean, Joe, you know this, especially in the winter. I'm coaching 6 days a week, and people at like how are you doing it? And it's like it sounds cliche, it sounds corny. Don't get me wrong. There's a lot of things that are pain in the posterior about it, but and again, this is what sounds corny, but I get more out of it than I feel like the kids do when I see these kids change as humans, right? Like they learn the respect, like how to look at somebody firmly in the eyes and, be confident in themselves. When you've seen them prior to that, maybe they didn't have that. And it's because they've built that confidence in themselves. So Marty, you're right. When they see it, it's just a bigger, higher, like, picture lesson that I feel like they're learning.
I can agree more. Yeah. And the other thing I just want to point out about what you said is like, teaching not necessarily like how to love it, but it's almost like you're teaching how to show up enthusiastically, because that's kind of how that ends up manifesting, is like when someone really loves it, they're just like, they have more energy, they're showing up and they're just ready for more, and they're excited to hear what we're doing that day. Whereas a lot of kids can struggle with that and kind of be Either their mind is not focused on where their feet are, or maybe they aren't sure if they like it or not yet, or maybe they've decided that they don't, that their parents making them do this. Like, that could be their truth too. And sometimes that could be helpful for me as a coach, is like, I don't necessarily need all these kids to love this sport like I do, of course, but man, if I can get some enthusiasm and some energy out of this, out of this group of kids or this individual, I know that that's going to be a better experience for them overall, right? And it's a big challenge with coaching, especially youth.
And you're going to make it for a better practice when they come in already enthusiastic. That warm-up's going to be great. That's going to be a nice transition to your stations and your drills, and you're going to end on a positive note, and you're not going to need to make any adjustments at all. And how about that for a nice segue? Because we're going to talk about making adjustments when we don't have that. And so I think a good underlining message here is make this love of the game, love of John, what I heard from you is that, yeah, you know what, the results are important too, but that's second fiddle to the process. Loving the work that you have to put in, loving the goals you have to set, loving your reaction to it. So if you get the kids in that mindset, then I think you're creating a nice recipe for success in all sorts of facets. So let's transition to our topic and get into it. I'm really excited about this and talk about adjustments. But before I do that, and talk about like what that entails, how to make those, let's first talk about what scenarios warrant some redirection. So what has to happen to a practice for coaches like you, me, Marty, all of us to stop and say, hey, we need to rethink this a little bit?
So I have two thoughts. One is, I think it depends on the age level, right? Because when you coach the youth, you stated at the beginning, Joey, the attention span. We host our Sunday night competes, right? Where it's basically just competing. And those kids would, almost anybody, in the high school kids, everybody wants to just compete. But the truth is that you've got to do skills, right? And that's what's going to build the IQ and just getting those high rep touches. So finding that balancing act is really tough. Whereas like I was thinking through this the other night, I was at the high school practice, and it's like, with those guys, it doesn't, you're just doing, this is what we're doing. And then those guys, it's almost like things have filtered out at that point. Like they don't have the passion and the love for it and aren't there to put in the work, kind of filter themselves out at some point. And they're just there to do whatever you need them to do because they trust, they know you're going to develop them. But I think, Joey, it's such a fine line to walk because even as coaches, it's easier to just let them compete, right? It's less work as far as practice plans and doing all of that. But just like anything, you're going to be proud of things that you needed to work hard for, right? And when my cousin always, and I talk about this, when was the last time you were proud of something you didn't work hard for, right? So you've got to put those skills in. So to answer your original question, I think, especially in the youth, the moment you start seeing just in the peripherals, just like starting to lose them right in line, they're talking to each other, they're not paying attention. And the other time, I think also is when you need to make those adjustments is numbers, right? You've got to be, when you go in, if you're going to do 30 minutes of, whether it's partner passing, line drills, whatever it might be, that's fine. That's easy. But then on the stations, if you are planning on 40 kids and you get 60 or you get 20, then you've got to adjust to make sure, because you can't have 20 kids in a station. You're going to lose them. I don't care what age you are. Right. So I think those are kind of the two big ones that I think of is when you see it, right? When you see you're losing them and maybe it's just not working. They're not getting out of it what you think they may be getting out of it. Right. That happens all the time. And then numbers. I think numbers drives a big reason for some adjustments.
Sure. Marty, what do you think?
I think on an individual level, there's a lot of adjustments that can be made without necessarily changing the drill we're doing or anything like that, right? Where we might just be like, oh, okay, this athlete doesn't really understand. He's not really sure the purpose of the drill, or she's not really sure why we're doing this drill. And that's showing because there's a lack of confidence. She's not really sure what to do at the front of the line, or she's going through the drill and she missed the concept that really was the focus point or something like that. So I think of that as an adjustment to some degree, is like, okay, this needs to be communicated to that individual, and maybe I need to give them an adjusted focus point of, hey, for this next rep, I really just want you to focus when you cut from cone A to cone B, that's the moment where I need your stick to be vertical, or something like that, where it's a specific focus point of an adjustment for an individual. I think kind of the bigger picture things that any coach might see is, you've already alluded to it a bit, it's either a lack of focus, maybe it's a lack of energy, or like I already alluded to, maybe the group is at a lack of understanding, And so either we need to kind of re-explain or go through it in a demonstrative style, or change what we're doing altogether. But those are typically what I'm looking for, is either lack of focus or lack of overall energy. And I know we're not getting into tactics yet, but that's kind of how I think about it. And also that for me, I'm, if there's a spectrum of like coaches that plan every detail of their practice to coaches who plan nothing, I'm definitely closer to this side of the spectrum, because I've kind of worked my way to that. It wasn't always that way for me. I think I used to plan a lot more meticulously, and now I feel a lot more confident as a coach, where I can go into a group of any number of kids and feel like, okay, I know I'm going to cover stick work, drills, and games. Like, here's how I think we should break this down. And so the adjustment tends to be like, how much time am I spending on one section versus, when should I move on to the next? So regardless, without changing the plan at all, the adjustments might just be the timing of things.
Marty, I like how we saw one thing stuck out that you just nailed, in my opinion, was you're there now. It takes time to get there. To get all these drills, you take from others and make things better, and then you've got them in your bag, right? And you say, you know what? This isn't working, right? And the other thing I thought of when you were saying that is the energy piece of it. I've taken it back old school, Joe. You've seen me do it both in town and on club, where if I'm not getting the energy level or the focus level, I'll just say, you know what, guys, go take 2 laps as a team and just take a lap around and get their heart rates pumping, and then say, listen, I need you to focus. You know what I mean? And I find that actually can reset it a little bit.
So what I was just going to say, and it's in line here, is that as coaches, we need to be perceptive of this. We need to be focusing, obviously, where their hands are, their feet are moving in the right direction. We're technically analyzing these kids, but we also have to have that semblance of who's not watching, who's staring at the clouds, who's looking at the parking lot, who's chit-chatting in line, who looks totally lost, who, when I ask somebody, do you understand what we're doing, just glazes over. So that's a skill set that a coach has to have in order to say, whether it's an individual basis like you were talking about, Marty, or whether you feel like the group has kind of lost it like you were talking about, John. Okay, everybody, whether it's take a lap, and we're going to get into strategies, but you need to, as a coach, have that in your tool bag of people watching and understanding them. And we talked a little bit about this, Marty, with our episode with Coach Gugino about emotional intelligence. I think this is a way to tie into that. I think there's an emotion here that's, I don't really want to be here, or I don't get it, or this isn't as important to me. And that's equally as powerful of an emotion as I'm all in, I love this, give me more, tell me, coach. You have to figure that out in people, right?
Yeah, I agree with that. And I think the other noteworthy adjustment mind frame is like the skill spectrum, like the fact that for a simple stick work drill, you're going to have your beginners that don't know where to put their hands yet. And then you're going to have your players that are rolling their eyes because they're advanced, they're club kids and they're above this. And so the adjustments in that, become, okay, how do I simplify versus how do I, challenge? And we've gone into depth in this in the past, but to me that feels relevant, right? It's like those are on the fly adjustments that you're making based on the body language you're seeing, right? The lack of confidence with one group versus the eye rolls with the other group. We're tuning into that as coaches.
I feel like both of you probably are going to have a similar answer because, again, both of you, and we just talked about it, have earned that kind of right to just kind of come to a practice, and you have so much knowledge, so many drills in the bank that you can kind of pull out quickly. But if we are, I want to talk about the specifics, but before we get into that, I want to get into the logistics of making these adjustments. Is it kind of on the fly where you go, I got to make this on the fly? Or just on the opposite spectrum, do you have a plan B and a plan C already kind of created and nestled behind that glass to break in case of an emergency? Do you take that level of planning to come in here and say, I'm going to do this, but if it doesn't work, we're going to come in with this?
I have a kind of brief answer for this, so I'll jump in. So I think it's a combination of both, because what I tend to try to do is have, with each section of my practice, have sort of an if time category. If this goes well, I know what I want to progress this into before changing into kind of the next phase of practice. And so if I can get to that plan B, that's kind of like a bonus. Whereas if it's not going so well and I need to pivot, like that is happening on the fly. Or if I need to scrap it, stay within the same phase of practice and introduce something completely different because we're maybe too far above, our level. I was trying to go too fast or something like that. That to me is something that could be planned, but I typically don't. I trust myself at this point where if I do need to make that adjustment, I didn't plan that beforehand, but I do have that if time section built into almost each phase. It's like, if I can add this rule to that game, if I have time for that, man, that'd be nice. And I'm trying to get there, but I'm not going to force it, right?
And if it doesn't, you have another practice later in the week that you can revisit it, right?
Exactly.
John, how about you? What do you like for this question?
I would agree with that, Marty, meaning it takes, in my opinion, a good coach to say, you know what, they're not grasping this, but this is, as long as it's in your repertoire of what you consider to be like, this is you guys have to understand it. It's to scratch whatever you had planned and say, guys, this is real, or girls, this is really important. And let's just break this down back to basics and then kind of get yourself where you need to be. So I think you're spot on with that, Marty. Joey, to the question, I don't have any like backup plan if this doesn't work. I find that it's always on the fly. And I used to struggle with that, meaning I almost felt as though I was failing and didn't want to do that. So it's like, we got to stick to plan. And I learned from a lot of really darn good coaches over the years. They're like, hey, this isn't work. We got to pivot here. And that was almost like, it gave me kind of the light bulb to say, you know what, this is what good coaches do. It's like, this isn't working, right? Maybe it's too advanced and we got to break it down a little bit rather be so progressive. Let's just, this 4-on-3 is not working. We got to get back to 2-on-1s and just working on get that space. You got to draw your guy and move it versus we're trying to, zips and pass around. We can't do that right now. And it's okay to do that. I think it benefits the kids more because, again, especially those big concepts where it's like, you wouldn't want to go take calculus right now if your algebra was not up to speed, right? You've got to get these other prerequisites, if you will, down before you move forward.
Sure. So there's no shame in saying I'm stubborn with my plan. Throw that out the window. Be vulnerable and say I was ambitious today. We're going to visit that later. Let's take it back a little bit, right?
Yeah, and just to build on that too, I think there's a beautiful concept that you laid out, John, of like there are certain concepts and drills and principles that even if we absolutely stink at this, it's still important enough that we need to like try to find a different way to get through to them. So like maybe an example could be off-ball defense, off-ball help, a little bit of the positioning. That's not the easiest thing to teach. And maybe you're doing a drill where you have the offense trying to pass from one player to another. And so there's the changing of the guard of, okay, when you're covering the ball, you're covering the ball. Well, when you're not covering the ball, you're going to shade in towards where you might need to, be potentially a help defender. And so, right, maybe it's like on offense, instead of the ball being passed back and forth and getting dropped every 5 seconds, we're just going to let them pass a basketball back and forth or a football, because the footwork is more important in that principle. Teaching that principle, the footwork and the timing and the spacing is way more important than the stick work, when you're trying to teach something like that. So that can be helpful for coaches is of like, all right, sticks are out of the equation now. I need you guys focusing on timing, spacing, and the footwork. And so we're going to introduce a basketball or a football and take sticks out of the equation. So when this person has the ball, here's the positioning, and I want you to shift this way. And try to simplify that so that, those are hard concepts to teach, is timing and spacing, and sometimes taking the stick work out of the equation can be the adjustment of simplification.
I really like that. I've always heard, for defense, if it's the sticks getting in the way, put it down and play with your feet. But I haven't really heard a way to do that offensively. But using a kickball or a football or a basketball is a really cool idea, just to kind of work on the other stuff you have to work on. And then we'll add in the passing and catching, later on your own time.
Yeah, like the 3-man weave, doing 3-man weave with the football instead. So you
Yeah.
understand, right? But Marty, I think you're exactly correct. But the best example I can use is like, especially what you had mentioned earlier, which is when you have a big gap with your top players versus kind of those players that are developing, right? And doing a 4-on-3, I like to use, I like that example. Going back to say we got to make this a 2-on-1 because it's timing is so important of this. It's the draw the guy when, because you see guys that come in and 3 steps in their pass and they don't understand the draw and then move it, where a lot of the kids do. So you'll have maybe 1 or 2 great reps and then a couple not so great. It's like, let's break this back down, because once they get that 2-on-1 and that draw and dump and the timing, then now we can do build up. So I think it comes back to that, the prerequisites. Once they nail that concept, you can now do build up. You can go 2v1, 3v2, 4v3, 5v4, 6v5 build up drill, because they get that concept of the draw and move it.
Exactly right. So I want to get into specifics with adjustments before I move on to game day stuff. We've talked a little bit about all of this, and we can make this rapid fire so we're not getting too bogged down. But we talked a little bit about low energy, kind of building that back up. John, you said maybe a little run to get their heart rate might do that. Marty, do you have any suggestions for low energy practices?
I always veer towards gratitude. You know, if it takes the practice or the drill stopping entirely and me bringing them in, and sometimes I really want to emphasize that I'm not punishing them. You know, like, you guys aren't in trouble. I just think there's a lack of perspective happening right now, because I see a lot of people not really running as hard as they can. I think you guys don't understand how great of an opportunity it is to be on the field and be healthy enough to be an athlete right now, when there's hundreds and thousands of people that don't have that ability, and we're lucky enough to be running around on this field. We're not going to give full effort. What do you mean? You know, like little stuff like that I think can maybe flip a switch in some percentage of them, not all of them. But I usually lean into gratitude and perspective of like, look, if we're not working hard, there's a lack of perspective here, and so I just want to call that out. You're not in trouble by it, but I'm now putting that on the table of like, let me see how hard we can run during this drill, just as a challenge, and see how kids react. And you know, that's part of the trial and error of coaching too. Is like, there's going to be some percentage of the kids that doesn't work for, you know, where maybe they need like an individual, like, hey, like, what's going on? Like, they need like a check-in or something like that. Like, so that's part of the challenge as well, is trying different things and seeing, you know, what resonates with certain types of personalities.
I think you're spot on with that, Marty. I had that thought a couple times throughout this conversation, is the importance of having conversations with kids, right? Because that's why I think that the longer that you get to coach somebody, the stronger and easier and the more you can help these kids, right? Because everybody's different. But I think that one of Joe, you've heard me say it, as a coach, I like to be very black and white, and that anything that I say, you take it for face value. And that means if you're not doing something the right way, I'm going to tell you. There's no emotion around it. If you're doing something great, I'm going to tell you you're doing it great. But just that, and I literally say those words to the kids, so that it's like, my job is to help you get better. So that way, you know, you're always getting the truth, right? Because what everybody wants here is to see individually and collectively everyone develop and improve as players and as human beings, right? So the other thing is, I think, Joe, we've done this together, is we know that they love the compete part of it, right? So like when they're getting lazy on GBs and they're not getting low and they're raking and things like that, it's like, guys, we're 30 minutes in, you've been a little slow, we're going to take a lap, and you guys, and it's a loaded question, right? You guys want to do meatloaf tonight? You want to do, you know, West Jenny? You want to scrimmage? And then they're all, yeah. Then it's like, then show us 30 minutes of hard work. Otherwise, we're gonna have to do these drills because you need it. Or you can come out firing right now. You can show us, and then we can all have fun and scrimmage in 30 minutes. Take a lap and let's go. And I find that kind of dangling that carrot of what we know they want to do, and we want them to do it too, but it can sometimes help shift a bit to get them fired up, so that, you know, they're getting ready, like, all right, let's scrimmage, and they kind of recalibrate and come back down to ground zero, if you will.
That's a great point, and it works. And to tie both of those together, what's the most important thing is that we're just communicating, right? We're not talking down to them. We're just talking to the way a coach and a player should communicate with one another, but we're being transparent and honest in our feedback. So that's perfect. Let's flip that and say, what happens if the energy is almost too great? Like they're just amped up, they're excited. How do we kind of refocus them back in and say, well, we're glad you're excited. That's great. We want that, but we also have some things to get through. So Marty, I see you smiling. Have you had this before or no?
I was gonna say, I mean, it hasn't happened too often where I'm like, you kids are running too hard, I mean, I think that's, that shows up sort of like in the antsiness too in lines, or that usually means probably people are being more distracted and more distractible in lines, and maybe you're losing purpose of the drill that you're trying to do because of that lack of focus. My go-to is like, I want to see you guys go. I love the energy. I absolutely love the energy, and let's make sure it's concentrated within the drill. And let me just ask, that Johnny and Timmy, you guys on the sideline, like, can I just have your attention for the next 30 seconds? Ready? All right, next rep, ready? And like, sometimes we over explain things as coaches. Like we have like too much to say, and it's like, I don't know. I don't need to back into like overall coaching philosophy. I just think it's such a simple overarching principle of like, if I'm watching a practice, how many minutes of that allotted time are the players having to listen to the coach versus do the thing? And how do we make that as efficient as possible? And I think that's a challenge with these adjustments is like, we have to get everyone's attention. Try to minimize how long you have it as part of your challenge as a coach. That's just kind of it feels important to me at least.
Yeah, I agree. I think to kind of piggyback off that too is sometimes, and I catch myself doing, I think we all do it, which is we try to, before the drill, talk a bit too much. And then when I catch myself say, you know what, I'd rather than spend 3 minutes explaining this, I'm going to be quick, let's get at it. And we're going to take the time in action so that the whole group can hear it and kind of use coaching moments in that way. But I think you make a great point, Marty. I do the same thing. And when I catch myself, that's what I do.
So here's another pie in the sky one, because we talked about what happens if it's a little too complicated for some. And so you have to kind of go back and revisit it. What if you think it's going to take this whole practice to figure, to talk through and work out, you're clear, but surprise, surprise, the kids get it really quick. So do we just kind of stubbornly stick with it and say, well, let's keep running it? Or do you have to have something in your pocket, maybe a wrinkle, maybe another game within the game to throw in there? What do you do if you budgeted for 45 minutes and the kids just picked up on it really fast?
Yeah, I think this is a great example of like an if time section of like, okay, we're going to work on clearing skeleton style. And if we can get these patterns down, if time, we're going to add pressure to it. Like you mentioned, that these kids want to compete. They want to play. They want it to feel like a game. And so as soon as we can, we should be adding pressure and we should be adding gamification. And I think that's what you do in that situation.
I agree. I think the other comes back to what I said with always just being very factual. And I think, guys, I had put 45 minutes towards this. You crushed it. Like, first off, well done. Secondly, you just earned an extra 18 minutes to do what you want. Do you want to scrimmage longer? Do you want to do 1v1 ad? Like, what do you want to do? So you like recognize with the hat tip, like, you nailed it. Good job. Your reward is you pick. And I think
like that a lot.
that empowerment, and then they're stoked. And it all comes back to me where that way, when you do kind of have to press down on me, it's just that when you're yelling or whatever it might be, like they're like, hey, when we're doing good, it all comes back to what we said, which is when you're nailing something, I'll tell you. When you're stinking something, I'll tell you. And you're doing great right now. So what do you guys want to do?
That's very good practical advice on all of that. So let's switch gears a little bit and talk a little bit about game day adjustments, which could be a whole episode in itself. But these are things that we have to do quickly and on the fly. So, assuming you have a game day plan and maybe it's your season plan, maybe you don't scout your team and you have one plan against, Hingham, but another one against Scituate. Maybe you just say, this is us, this is our plan, go out and execute and we're going to be fine. But still, there's going to be times when it's not working. So then what? John, let's start with you on this one.
Yeah, I think one thing that came to mind as you were raising the question is that I always like to do is for kids, especially in that, think K-5 or 6, kids that have started to specialize in a position, like if you're way up or you're way down, to say like, hey, is there anybody that has not played a position that they really, really want to do right now and take the opportunity? Again, that reward, like we want you to do this, right? So that especially the kids, that some are really good at certain positions, but maybe they don't want to be along stick media or D, they want to be attack, and say, do you want to get some reps down there, right? I think that's okay. But as far as when it's not working, I mean, I think that answer can range, right? Because the way that we have our offense set up, did they scout us and they're sliding early, right? So maybe we want to take somebody with, the hottest stick and pop them on a certain wing so that when that slides come early, we're finding them every time, right? Or is it the face-offs? It could be a million different things, but I think that's where, in my opinion, and Joey, you know this, Marty, I know you know this too, is when you're surrounded by good coaches, like that's where it's so great to have them, because you bounce those ideas off and kind of work on the fly. I don't think I'm answering your question, Joey.
Well, it's a hard one, and it's not very specific.
Yeah.
So I just wanted to kind of start the conversation, but let me get specific. And Marty, you can answer this one here. How long? How about this? Let's take it here. How long into a game before you kind of say this isn't working? So when do you pull that trigger to say let's talk about it? And maybe part B is, do you as coach just kind of make that executive decision, or do you kind of powwow with the assistants and say, should we stop it? Should we talk to them? Should we call a timeout? But talk through the timeline of this a little bit.
Yeah, I can jump in there. I think it's never too early necessarily, because you might notice something on the first play and say, ooh, we could maybe take advantage of that. But probably the first quarter, somewhere in there, of like, let's really let the flow of the game start to develop. And I think you can probably put it into 3 buckets. Maybe you're going to make an offensive adjustment, maybe it's a defensive adjustment, and maybe it's a transition adjustment. And you can kind of loop in face-offs and subbing into transition maybe. And so, yeah, I think after the first quarter, and I think about just like the obvious things that you're going to notice anyways, of like, okay, I can see who their best player is. This girl is just dominating, and she's taking it to the rack, and we need to make it harder for her to get the ball in the first place. Or if she does get the ball, we're going to need to help a little bit quicker than we have been. So things like that, I would think within the first quarter you start to pick up on that, and definitely by halftime, having like clear communication around, okay, we see this pattern, let's try to make this adjustment. And at a youth level, I think it can be realistic to make an adjustment at halftime, but I think yelling something out from the sideline in the speed of play is probably not going to land as well. So it's going to have to be something you either call a timeout on, that you're agreement with your staff on, or something that waits until halftime to really make it a teaching point.
Let me follow up, John, before I get your take on that. I think this is just because it's in my head. I just want to get it out. I think this is a really perfect example of why it's important to have great coaches with you and to have one field voice that's focusing on, we had a conversation about this, having like a field vocal captain, but your other coaches are actually making these adjustments in real time on the sideline with the kids who are either about to go in or just came off. And so, having a pattern where you say, you just came off from a grade midi shift, go talk to this coach over here. We're going to show you what we just saw. So next time you're out there, maybe you can see that as well. Same thing with the offense and the defense. So kind of having that pattern, I think, really helps as well. So you don't necessarily have to call a timeout or whip out the whiteboard at the halftime and say, we got to rethink everything. You can kind of do this on the fly with the kids in real time. That's all I wanted to throw out there.
Great strategy. Yeah. Love that.
I agree. I think at the real young age, even up to probably 4th, you can still joystick them at that age, right? Like you can be yelling loud enough where the game's not moving too fast, where you can, meaning on the clear, like, hey, middies higher, or, attack. I need you. You got a guy at X. Like you can joystick all of that. I think as you go up in age, though, that the ability, just because of the speed of the game, and then like anything, these kids have learned how to communicate, so it's hard to joystick them at that point. But I think that's a good point, Joey, where we pull them off in real time, and that always tends to work. It worked well anyway. But
You kind of alluded to a little bit of some of these offensive adjustments, but just we'll quickly go through these 3 points. Marty, you mentioned offense, defense, transition. So just quick bullet points on these. What are some adjustments you might make offensively if you feel like you're just kind of struggling to create the opportunities? Most of the time for me, I see just the kids aren't moving off ball. They all kind of get into that formation. You go, great. Step one accomplished. They're in this little 2-3-1, which is a nice starting point, but now nothing's really happening. So what are some offensive things that we can kind of throw out there to kind of spark that energy a little bit?
My go-to concept is that the cutter creates the space. And typically on offense, it has to do with the timing. So 2-3-1, the example you gave, maybe we have a decent dodger that's going to initiate the offense, but the clear through just isn't happening early enough, right? And so the adjustment is I just want that top person, I'll call them out by name, to make that diagonal cut kind of through the crease, earlier than we have been, right? So as soon as they get the ball, I want you to go and I want you to cut looking for the ball, be a threat. So to me, it's creating pockets of space through cutting is the vague way of like saying that can solve a lot of problems. Typically is to get the movement at face value. You need your off-ball players to move. And then if we can be strategic about, if we can have that person cut through, it opens up the space for that dodger, which is great.
So almost, John, I want your take on this, but almost, Marty, where we kind of teach our off-ball players to clear through after they recognize the dodge is coming, you're saying the off-ball player cuts and then the dodger will kind of react to them, kind of flipping it a little bit and putting the onus on the off-ball player.
I think, and we actually, we're very fortunate that we get to coach together so much, but we talked about it last night. I think that once the kids are ready and very young, the off ball, like you teaching how on and off ball picks is, to me, always, it's going to, if they're locking somebody off, that's how you're going to get that person the ball. And it just, if they're playing tighter defense on right on the numbers, like those picks, creating the two-man game, again, on ball and off ball. If you can teach these kids that, but you can't do it in a game situation, but I think it should be a part of the practice plan for all these kids to understand off ball movement. You can see how quickly the basketball players know how to do it, right? They know how to clear through, they know where to go, they know how to set these picks in the movement, and you generate offense. So offensively, I'd say that's something you can quickly, they should be doing it anyways, but when you kind of need some offense brewing, I think that's a really good way to do it.
All right, how about defensively? If you're just kind of in that phase, it's just not working, what do we think there?
Well, I would start by saying the number one sort of strategy that you would be ready to implement. Maybe this is something that you definitely need to practice. It's something you'd introduce a little bit later in the season, but we need to do this over the course of a season, is how to sort of pressure and try to get the ball back. We want to add ball pressure and we want to sort of press out on the adjacent passes so that person who's getting pressured doesn't have some easy pass they can make. Late game, down by a goal type of scenario. And this is something that kids love, the scenarios in the drill phase of practice of like, hey, we're down by a goal, defense, you got to get the ball back. It's a good way to amp up the energy on defense at least. So I think that's something that you'd want to get ahead of in practice and be ready to adjust on game day.
Yeah, I agree. I think that you nailed that, Marty, like having a black play where it's lock off and we got to get this ball back, right? But you've got to practice that, because one guy that doesn't do it, it's not going to work, right? The other thing that came to mind for me is like you've got to like looking to the leader that's playing close D to get these guys to communicate. Like you've got to know who that leader is to get them loud and to help get a momentum shift and just breaking it back to basics, which is it's man plus. Find your guy. You guys are not doing that. And I think it's more when you see a team start to break down collectively, I find that a leader can help with that. Like, all right, guys, we got to just move and we've got to talk, and when you talk and you're there for your teammates and I'm hot, I'm your one, I'm your two, it helps sync it back together. But you've got to have you're not going to be able to tell you're more timid or non-leader, if you will, to kind of give that a go.
And then I think there's one more big one, I think, for youth players. I don't think this is too advanced, but we can sometimes get ahead of ourselves as coaches of like, here's the slide package, but what we can probably all agree on is that teaching like a 1 slide versus a 2 slide to 3rd and 4th graders is pretty freaking hard, to have them like conceptualize like, okay, that person's going to slide and this is the help until this guy gets back and and so it's great if we're like, oh, the person in the middle is going to be hot and that's our crease defense and maybe that's our crease sliding defense and that's called blue. But we should also have, I think, an understanding of like a near man sliding. And I think this is actually easier to teach in some regard, which is whoever is closest to the defender that just got beat, just go help the ball. It's more of a team camaraderie. Like, anyone could be ready to slide because you might think you're the one, but all of a sudden there's an early clear through. And so now there's a new person in the crease and you think you're the one, but your guy's fading out to the wing to go get open for a shot. You should probably exit and let the clear through guy be hot. And without a 3rd and 4th grader realizing that, oh, I'm closer, I'm going to try to help the ball, and so determining some kind of terminology between closest player sliding versus like a crease slide might be helpful as an adjustment you could be ready to make.
What I love about that is you're teaching these kids that it's better for more of them to do that and then have them dump off and then get burnt that way than nobody does it. And then I think once you kind of because you can't really teach that kid to have that aggression to go want to help out that ball, that support. But if you can get your team to react to that, it's probably a lot easier to then peel back and be like, okay, all 5 of us have crashed and 4 now teammates are wide open. That kind of creates that cerebral conversation you could have at practice in that laboratory session to say, what did we learn from that? How can we now have a system where we figure out the best person to do that and not all of us? But that's so much easier than, hey, no one helped right there and they just ran point blank and scored on your goalie. So I really like that a lot.
I love that, Marty. I like that a lot.
I'd rather have 2 people slide, especially in youth, and like, hey, you make 2-3 passes and find the open person on the crease, hats off to the offense, right? But at least we tried to help,
Exactly. And chances are in 3rd and 4th grade, they're sailing that pass.
Yeah, and it's easier to recover when you've got 2 open middies way up top. Then it's easier to teach that recovery when 3 guys slide and at least it's there. I think that's a really good idea. I like that a lot.
So we just nailed it. There you go. That's the best adjustment you can make right there.
There you go.
This was the tip of the iceberg. I'm conscientious of the time, so I want to wrap it up. But there's so much you can do. But I think the main bullet points here is to just kind of be authentic and honest with yourself and not stubborn. That's a great lesson that I've learned listening to you all is, hey, you might have a plan, but be prepared to throw it out if it's what your team and your kids need. There's no shame in that. Have would you call it an if time? Marty, is that the way you described that?
Yep.
If you have time, then let's add a couple of wrinkles. Let's play some games. But John, I also love the idea of you saying, hey, if you nailed this and I didn't really plan for this extra 20 minutes, that's yours. That's yours to decide. And I know what the answer is going to be. You want to scrimmage, you want to play. So that's a great carrot to have in your pocket as well. And then the most important thing is just good communication between coaches as you're looking to your assistants and saying, should we call a timeout? Should we fix this? Do you want to whiteboard this up while I continue, to talk to them on the field? And then having these honest conversations at practice goes a long way too. So I think those are some really serious and solid pieces of advice we can give to a young new coach coming into this who has taken our advice to say planning is important, but is now hearing the message, but be prepared to rip it up if you have to. So is there any final thoughts that either of you have? I know we could probably talk for 2 hours on this, but John, anything that you wanted to kind of throw out there? By the way, such a pleasure to have you. I think Marty's kind of, the rest of the coaches watching this gets to see how lucky I am to get to coach with a guy like you. But what sort of put a bow on this topic for us, will you?
Yeah, again, I know we're wrapping here. The only one that comes to mind that is really important, in my opinion, I've been burned in the past, is to have multiple rides and clears. Because if you, especially when you've got a goalie that's got a weak stick, and they know that, they're going to hard ride, and you've got to just practice through that. So I think making that part of your practice plan, like 2 different types. If this is how they ride, you've got to, because then we can joystick, but they've got to know what we're talking about. And when we talk about the type of clear that we're going to do, because that, especially in a youth game like that, you can go down 4 or 5 goals by not having a successful clear. Momentum's down, and then it's really hard to recover. So that's my only other thought, is to make sure you're putting in time and effort on the clears in reacting to certain rides.
Perfect. Love that. Marty?
Yeah, I'll try to sprinkle a little bit. You guys are both doing a great job putting a bow on this. And, on that transition topic, I think, it's a little bit more principles oriented. It's more like, not letting people get behind us when we're going from offense to defense. It also has to do with substitution timing, helping us clear the ball before we sub. It's pretty hard for a player to get on offense and then be like, now I should sub, right? Like, teaching the value in that, of like, well, if you're on offense, you need to be ready to get back and play defense, right? And so there's also the terminology aspect of it. I love this phrase joist stick that you're using.
I do
But
too.
you gotta be able to say, Jimmy, get to the non-box side, and like he needs to know what that means, right? So there's the terms, and then for one final adjustment, I think about is more on like the defensive side of it, and like just having fun with it. We're talking about youth kids that imagine a first and second or third and fourth grade game or a practice where I'm teaching this, and it's like, hey, on defense, when I call chicken nuggets, I want you all to sprint at your matchup and make a crazy silly face, and they're gonna, it's like that might win us a game. Chicken nuggets play might win us a game because we, see the value in like kind of, startling our opponent, and maybe they make a mistake. But I don't know. I just thought that was a fun one I'd throw in there. And I, as always, appreciate you, Coach Joey, setting this up. And thank you, Coach John. And I'm glad you guys get to work together and I got to meet you today. And hopefully Coach has got something out of this. So thank you.
Yes, thank you, John.
This is awesome.
We appreciate it. So I just wanted to thank you, Marty. Thank you, John, for joining us today for another great conversation. Thanking all of our listeners, the great coaches who are putting in their extra work by listening to this and adding their own insights and ideas, and to the folks at Mass Youth Lax for helping to power these great conversations we're having. So that's it for this episode, and we look forward to seeing you next time.
Thanks, everybody. See you next week.